Okay, friends, our next region, as you can see, is Galilee. Galilee is a word that means district or region, something like that. A district or a region. Isaiah 9:1, nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who were in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, but in the future he will honor Galilee of the nations, or Galilee of the Gentiles, the Goyim. So this region right here, friends, is notorious for being overgrown, infiltrated with non-Jews. It's the Galilee of the Gentiles. And part of the reason is the following. Number one, as you can see, you have Lebanon to the north. In Hebrew, it's Lavan, and it means white. It's also a word that's used for yogurt or milk that the people in the desert would eat or snack on. And like Laban. Same kind of thing. And it's called Lavan or Laban or Lebanon because of the snow-capped mountains. So that's to the north. And then to the west, you could see, is the Mediterranean Sea. We mentioned in our previous lecture why there's no sea in heaven. Well, actually, I just kind of touched on it, and I had so many questions. Why is there no sea in heaven? And I'll just take a moment to tell you why I think there's the reasoning why there's no sea in heaven. And in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. This idea of the abyss, of chaos, of disorder, an uncreated, uninhabitable land. The sea. Isaiah 27:1. Leviathan, the serpent, Satan, the monster, the symbol of pride and evil. Isaiah 27:1, he abides, he lives in the sea. Isaiah says the wicked are like the troubled sea, this place of disorder and chaos. There's intertestamental accounts of Methuselah binding the devils and putting them where they live, in the sea. When you get to the account of the Lord Jesus casting out the demons out of Legion, the demons, of course, go into the pigs, and the pigs can go anywhere they want to go. But the pigs go to the sea, because that's in their thinking where the abyss is the sea. The ghost, not the ghost, the spirit of the Lord Jesus is walking on the sea, and that, of course, spooks out the sailors, because they equal the sea with the abyss, or with chaos and with disorder and an uncreated kind of uninhabitable world. And so that's why in Revelation 21:1, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and also there's no more sea. Because Revelation is written by a Jew, and to a Jew, a sea equals all those things. And that is not to mention extra biblical inferences or examples like the uncircumcised evil sea people. They come from the sea. No Israelite king ever had really any maritime adventures except Solomon and Jeroboam, and those didn't turn out very good. So it's kind of, when you put all the pieces of the puzzle together, it seems to point that that's the reason why in heaven there is no sea. To the south is Samaria, which we'll get to in this lecture or the next one. The root of Samaria is shamar, which means to guard. And it's a guarded land because of its high elevation. And then to the east, right here, you have the Jordan Rift. As you can see, the Galilee is divided into two, the upper and the lower. Think of like walking up steps. You're at a 2,500, 3,000 foot sea level, and then you climb up to the 3,500 sea level. Remember, when we look at a map of the land of Israel, north is wet, south is dry, west is wet, and east is dry. A very lush, green, beautiful place to live. Up in the upper Galilee, because the terrain is so high and lifted up and rugged and tough, there's not a lot of cities up there that we're really familiar with. And the people in the world of the Bible seem to live closer to the lower Galilee and closer to Highway 80 than they did in the upper Galilee. But the reason, once again, it's called the Galilee of the Gentiles is because you're surrounded by Gentiles on the sea, you're surrounded by Gentiles to the north, Gentiles to the east, and the main route, the Highway 80, goes right through here. You have the port city of Haifa. So when you're in Jerusalem, in that high hill country, 2,500 feet above sea level, where it's difficult to physically get to, then it's difficult for ideas and thought and practice and new religions and all these kind of things to get up there. But in an area like this, where it's flat and wide and open and easy access, open doors all the time to the sea, it's the Galilee of the Gentiles. Well, let's look at a couple cities in the Galilee. Let's zero in on Megiddo. Megiddo. The first time Megiddo is mentioned in any source outside the Bible is in the execration texts. These are from the 19th century BC. If you're reading a book, this would be the late Bronze Age. This is the time of the patriarchs. And as we mentioned in a previous lecture, these execration texts were made to look like little dolls, or they were made shaped like a bowl. And on the doll or in the bowl, the magicians of Pharaoh would write out spells, and not only would they write out the spells, but they write out a city list of the cities that the Pharaoh is going on his tour to hopefully conquer, and then they would smash the objects at the feet of Pharaoh, so may this happen to your enemies. Speaking of the magicians of Pharaoh, I have a friend, his dad did a real in-depth study in Egyptology and magicians and etc. And he discovered something kind of neat. We're all familiar with the account in Exodus of the snakes, right? The snakes of the magicians and the snakes of Moses. And he actually discovered that there is a type of snake in Egypt that has a particular pinch point behind the neck. And if you pinch it in that point, it becomes hard as a rock and straight as a stick. And what the magicians do to this very day, once they have that pinch point, they dip it in mud, and then they let it bake for a few minutes. And then if you're standing from here to here, you don't know any better. It looks like a staff. And what they do is they let the pinch point, the snake go, and then it shatters on the ground, and then the snake comes, resuscitates. So it's kind of neat that it's just, Janus and Jambres, it's just smoke and mirrors for the most part. That's all it really was. Well, back to Megiddo then. What you're looking at here is a typical high place when you read the Bible. And for example, 2 Kings 23:15. And you can see all the places that the high places are mentioned just in this verse. Of course, high places are frowned upon by the prophets and the writers of the Bible. But these high places, the reason they were frowned upon, because they were substituting for the people going to Shiloh, or they were substituting for the people going up to Jerusalem to do, kosher sacrificing. You just can't go do your own thing, right? Even though if you have the right intentions. But I just wanted you to see, this is about from the time of Abraham, though, just to see what it kind of looked like if you were to go up to a high place and offer up a sacrifice. And by the way, the Canaanite sacrificial high place system was also intertwined or linked with cult prostitution, like Tamar in Genesis chapter 38, right? She's by Highway 101, where a high place would be. And that's where you would expect, right by the high place, right by the main route, for the cult prostitutes to be. Well, Megiddo. As you can see from this map, guys, Megiddo is a hub city that's located on the main routes going to the main places. And we'll look at another map in a moment. But this is Highway 80 right here, guys. Right? And as you can see, it goes right smack dab past Megiddo. Not only does 80 go past there, but 101 goes right past it. Every single route in the Galilee of the Gentiles kind of magnates towards Megiddo. Now, the map is kind of a caricature, but it helps, I think, kind of get the idea of it. You have the high hill country of Jerusalem, or the central hill country right here, 2,500 feet above sea level. Then you have the lowlands, or the Shephelah, which we talked about, 660 feet above sea level. Then you have that flat plain. And of course, the main route, the Highway 80, is going to stay on that flat plain because you have horses and chariots and all these carts and all. You don't want to go through the mountains, but you can see it goes right here through this would be the Valley of Jezreel, and that dot would be Megiddo. So it's all about location, location, location with Megiddo. And since in the beginning it's been the battleground, the stage of all of the kind of apocalyptic end times kind of battles in the ancient Near East because of its physical setting. Even look at the battle in 1918, fought during World War I between Allied troops led by General Allenby and the defending Ottoman Empire army. They met at the Valley of Jezreel because all roads that go through Israel, because remember, Israel is the bridge that connects Africa and Europe and Asia and in the world of the Bible, right? You're going to bring your armies together somewhere to meet, and then, boom, you fight. Speaking of Megiddo in the Valley of Jezreel, and war is fought there, This is a representation of Thutmose III, one of the great pharaohs of Egypt. And it's a list of his great achievements and his taking of the city of Megiddo. We don't have to read the whole thing, but this is a translation, of course, of an Egyptian text. And it says, and they fled Thutmose III, headlong to Megiddo with faces of fear. So even in the beginning, it's all about, well, Thutmose III said it the best. Taking Megiddo is like taking 1,000 cities. And it's all because of its location. Now, speaking of its location, in 1 Kings 9:15, here is the account of the forced labor King Solomon conscripted to build the Lord's temple, his own palace, the terraces, the wall of Jerusalem, and Hatzor, Megiddo, Gezer. Hatzor, Megiddo, and Gezer. So in other words, Solomon rebuilt New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. He built the main cities on the main route. And that's part of the reason why at Solomon's time that there was more silver in Jerusalem than stones, because he's able to repave the roads. Great stimulus package, okay? Grade the roads, repave them, and try and bend all that traffic up to the capital city of Jerusalem. Now, when archaeologists come to Hatzor, Megiddo, and Gezer, just like 1 Kings 9:15 says that he rebuilt those three cities, you find something called a six-chambered gate. A six-chambered gate, this would be the entryway right here. The door of the gate of an ancient city, it would have been covered with metal, not only for ornamental reasons, but also to protect it from easily combusting with fire. And then this six-chambered gate, then, it functions as a fortification system. If someone just wants to bust right through the gate, right, they'd have doors that would shut off, right, at each of the six different chambers. And then, of course, in times of peace, the gate in the world of the Bible is the center of the fabric of the society. Everything happens in the gate, right? Then went Boaz up to the gate and sat him down there. And he makes the transaction, right, to take his wife. Rumors are in the gate. Children play in, everything happens in the gate of the city. So when an archaeologist is digging at a tell, you want to dig at the gate first, because that's probably where a lot of the goodies are going to be. So when they come to these three cities, what do they find? They find a gate that is only used once in the history of all of the Israelite architecture, and it's only used at three cities. Just like the text says. Look at the text cannot prove the supernatural. That's just how it is. You have to believe those things by faith. But the text does prove the natural. Every single time, like we've said before, they find something in the earth, it somehow, some way correlates in a positive manner to the text. That's the gate then at Gezer, at Hatzor. That's the gate at Megiddo, and then that's the gate at Gezer. Just for your information, what you're looking at right here, this is the valley of Ayalon, where the sun stood still and the moon stayed until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. You have the six chambers here. Of course, this would have been covered with tiles. This would have been the drain, the drought of the city to carry out all the rainwater and the garbage and everything. But yeah, pretty neat. Now, let's get back to Megiddo for a moment. Really nice aerial shot of the site. What you're looking at here is a huge cistern to hold grain, wheat, barley, etc. And right here is a huge water shaft. So this city is not only a chariot city, kind of think of it as like the Chicago on the Highway 80, the middle peg of the three, a strong financial, not necessarily military, but there's a lot going on there. And can withstand any kind of siege, any kind of fight. This is what the city probably looked like at the time of Solomon. I mean, this is like one of his crown jewels of his cities, a really nice fortified city. They found something neat in here. They found this section of the city, which would have been right about in here. And they're like, what is this? This is kind of hard to figure out. What are we looking at here? But the idea is, since Megiddo was a chariot city, and of course the chariots functioned as policemen and military and collecting taxes and all these kind of things, the idea then is that this would have been where they would have held the horses at. And you would have just tied up the horses, right, to the posts right there. Another neat object that came from there is a seal. Now, we know from like Song of Solomon 8:6, for example. By the way, I did quote Song of Solomon in its entirety from memory once. It was at a Golden Ages banquet. And there was no eye contact after chapter 1. No one would look at me. Like, you guys wanted me to do it. And so I just told the rest of it like that. I didn't get into it or use the motions. Got to be careful there, what I'm doing with my hands. But a seal. Set me as a seal upon thy heart, as a seal upon thy arm. On your heart or on your arm. So what you would do, instead of having a wallet in the world of the Bible, this would be what you would use to make any major transaction. You want to pay your taxes in kind, which is what you would do. You pay your taxes in your wheat or your barley or your grapes or something like that. You'd get a vessel and you'd stamp your seal on it and then you send it off to the government. You want to buy a piece of property, you got to have a seal, right, to impress upon the wax or the clay or whatever. You get the idea. Well, on your heart or on your arm. So you'd wear your seal on a necklace or you'd wear it on an armlet. So you can just take it out and right, this is what Tamar asks Judah for, his seal, right? His identity, anything, right? You can buy or trade or sell if you have that seal. But this seal, guys, is kind of neat. It says Shema, which of course is also the word to hear in Israel, like hear, O Israel, Shema, O Israel, but it's someone's name as well. And it says he's the servant of Jeroboam. And that would be Jeroboam II. Jeroboam II, who was the king during the time of Jonah the prophet. So in the early 1900s, when the University of Chicago was digging at Megiddo, they found that goodie, and because it was during the Ottoman period, which was 1517 to 1917, it got shipped to Ottoman, to Turkey, to Constantinople, and just got put in a room and has never been seen again in public. But before it was sent off to the Ottomans, the Israelites made a copy of the seal. So it's kind of neat. It's one of 50 to 60 persons mentioned in the Old Testament, right, who archaeologists have found their name on an object in the earth. Now, this is the Valley of Jezreel right here that we've been talking about, is connected to Megiddo. And Jezreel means Yahweh sows. Yahweh sows, like Yahweh sows seed, because of the fertility of the region. Now, what you're looking at here is this is the mount. It's called the Mount of Precipice, and it's right outside of Nazareth. So basically, the Valley of Jezreel is the Lord Jesus' backyard as a kid. And, I think there's something to it that your environment you grew up in kind of shapes your personality to a certain degree. Right, like people from Pittsburgh, right? They're blue collar, lunch pail, right, kind of guys. And people from Silicon Valley, maybe not the same, a little different. Okay, and but Jesus is growing up. His backyard is that apocalyptic end times battlefield, where every single major battle in the history of the ancient Near East that takes place in and around Israel has happened there. And you wonder how much that rubbed off, right, on him and on his teaching and on his eschatology and his thought process. Just something to think about. Speaking of eschatology, of course, many people associate Megiddo with Revelation 16:16. And they, or he, depending on your translation, gather them together to the place which in Hebrew is called Armageddon. So John, of course, is writing in Greek, and he has to translate what the word Armageddon or Har Megiddo means to the audience, because the audience doesn't understand Hebrew. So Har Megiddo. Now, I'm going to try and gently suggest that Megiddo, the Valley of Jezreel, is not where Armageddon takes place. Now, I know that this is the popular view, and when things become popular, they just become dogmatic, and we don't think twice about it, and it just is what it is kind of thing. But let's try and unpack this Har-Mageddon a little bit. This is a har. Har is a Hebrew word, which means mountain. Mountain. Not a tell. Megiddo is a tell. Megiddo is not a har. And I think John, who grew up in this area and is fluent in Hebrew, knew the difference between a har and a tell. Okay? It's not a har, it's a tell. But because it sounds like Megiddo, Har-Mageddon, right? It sounds like it. People said, well, since it sounds like it, and all the other end time battles have taken place here, it must be it. It must be it. Now, this is a tell, as you can remember from before, right? The layers, right? That's a tell. Megiddo is not a tell. Or Megiddo is a tell. It is not a har. For example, the real meaning of Har-Mageddon is the mountain of assembly. That's what Armageddon literally means. The mountain of assembly, or some translations, the mountain of congregation. The place where you gather together and come up. That mountain. For example, like in Isaiah 14:13, you said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens, I will raise my throne above the stars of God, I will sit enthroned upon the mount of assembly, or the mount of congregation. 1 Chronicles 15:3. And David assembled all Israel at Jerusalem to bring up the ark of the Lord to its place which he had prepared for it. You assemble up, you come up, not to Megiddo, you assemble up, you come up to the mountain of the Lord in Jerusalem. Who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? So Jerusalem is not a tell. Jerusalem's a har. It's Mount Zion. Mount Zion, not Tel Zion. So the mountain of assembly, the mountain of congregation, which once again is literally Armageddon, is the mountain of assembly, the mountain of congregation. Now, it's possible that, and it's probable that in the end, that's where they'll gather. The beast and all the world powers will gather there and make their way down to Jerusalem, Har-Mageddon. Zechariah 14:1-5. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem, not Megiddo. Not, anywhere else, but Jerusalem. I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. The city shall be taken, the houses rifled, the women ravished. Half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, etc. So when he comes to the Mount of Olives. He doesn't come to the Valley of Jezreel. So the battle, the eschatological end-time battle, right, has to take place, I think, in Jerusalem. Jerusalem's worth fighting for. Megiddo, when John's writing it, had not been inhabited for over 300 years. It was a ghost town. And it's a towel. Something to think about. Well, let's stay in the region and go to Capernaum. Capernaum, right here. Well, of course, Jesus is, from Nazareth. As you can maybe see from the topographical map there, Nazareth is high and lifted up, where Capernaum is not. Capernaum is San Francisco. It's flat, it's right on Highway 80, it's a port city, and it's Gentile to the core. So why would he move from here to here? Well, thank you for asking. we live for part of the year, you can see the valley right here, can't you? We live right about there in Redding, okay, for part of the year. There's a little town right over here by Mount Lassen that's called Manton. Has anyone ever heard of it? Oh, wow, okay. No good thing comes out of Manton, okay, except the Winnebago man. Anyways, living in Capernaum is like living in San Francisco, and living in Nazareth is like living in Manton. Guys, if you live in a world where you cannot tweet out your message, you cannot publish your books about your message, faith comes by hearing, not reading. Okay, application 2,000 years later on the other side of the world, sure. But you have to tell someone the gospel. They have to hear Jesus preach, etc. They're not going to come, guys, to Nazareth. It's in Manton. I'm not going up there. I have no reason to go up there. It's out of my way. It's inconvenient. But you know what I will go? I will go to San Francisco because it's on Highway 80. There we go. He left Nazareth, which is the idea, I'm not coming back. He left Nazareth behind and went to live in Capernaum by the sea in the region of Zebulun and Naphtali. Okay. Then if we backtrack a little bit, 7 miles wide, 13 miles long for the Sea of Galilee, the only freshwater lake. It's not even a sea. I don't know why they call it a sea. It's a lake. It's a freshwater lake. The only freshwater lake essentially in all of the Fertile Crescent. The port city right here. Very nice. Think of all the different kind of people that the Bible mentions were at Capernaum. There's tax collectors at Capernaum. By the way, here's how it would work with Zacchaeus or Matthew or someone like that. The Roman government would have a meeting, and whoever wants to be a tax collector would come. Okay, everyone here? Good. Okay, we are having a bid, a sealed bid. All we care about is which one of you can guarantee us the most amount of money. Okay? And it has to at least be whatever. We'll say $100,000. Now, if you can somehow swindle or raise $200,000, you keep that $100,000. We don't care. All we want is for you to give us $100,000. And then everyone would have a sealed bid, and they'd send in their bid, and Zacchaeus wins. So that's kind of how it worked. But we have Matthew as a tax collector, but Matthew would be fantastic, guys, as being a scout or being a guide in the region, right? It's all on foot, right? And Matthew knows where those bums are who don't pay their taxes, right? Who are hiding over the hill and through the woods, right? So he'd be a really great scout to have with you to know which way to go and, right, good places to find people. Not only that, you have the centurion. You have a huge Roman army presence there. Fishermen galore, by the way, right? You can't eat catfish in the world of the Bible, right? They're not kosher. So if you're Peter and you catch all these fish and you have unkosher fish, what are you going to do with them? You bring them to Tiberias. That's what you do with them, and you sell them to the Gentiles in Tiberias. By the way, Tiberias was considered like the city of the dead in the worlds of the Bible. The first capital, quote-unquote capital, during the Roman period of Galilee was Sippori. It's really close to Nazareth. Jesus lived like a half-hour walk, a 45-minute walk from Manton to, we'll say, like Redding. A real industrial, up-and-coming, we'll pretend Redding's that way, okay? Influential, rich, cosmopolitan city. He lives really close to it, so I'm sure his tekton, remember the master builder, that he's doing this kind of master building, not in Manton, because there's no work there. Everyone's unemployed, right? He's going to go to the big city, right, where he can do mosaics and doors and all these kind of things. So we've got tax collectors there. We've got Roman centurions there. You got people coming through all the time. I mean, it's just a hopping place, right, where you want your word to get out, and people are going to go north and south on Highway 80 and tell other people what they just heard from this teacher. It's the perfect place. And you have a great location here too, right? Right off 101, right? You just need a billboard sign now. Yeah. Okay. So here's the synagogue in Capernaum. Let's Let's do an aerial shot there. Now, this synagogue, guys, is not from the time of Jesus. It's from just after the time of Jesus. But the shape and size are the same. The shape and size are the same. The door of the synagogue, every synagogue built in and around that time, always points to Jerusalem. But what's kind of neat about this synagogue is that right here, guys, this is a school. And archaeologists have found that the school attached to the synagogue in Capernaum is the biggest school in and around the time of Jesus in all of Galilee. So you can infer that he said these things while he was teaching in the synagogue of Capernaum. So, okay, when Jesus is not on a road trip, an itinerant road trip, speaking at different places, what does he do Sunday through Friday? He teaches Torah. He teaches at a Bible school or something like that, right? And you have the biggest school, right? You know, the Bible doesn't say that, but archaeology shows us that, which is pretty cool. It's a neat kind of little insight. What does Jesus do during the day, you know? Well, of course, this was his headquarters. And, he kind of slept on the couch at Peter's mother-in-law's house, sort of, right? When Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. So that's where he lived, in Capernaum. He lived at the Peter's relative's house. Now, if you walk out of that synagogue and you throw a baseball, or maybe not you, if I threw a baseball, okay, you'd hit a building. And originally, the building looked probably something like this. This is called the Bet Av, right? It's just nice nuclei, kind of family living right there with a courtyard and everything. And but you walk out of the synagogue and throw that baseball, you're going to hit that thing. And what in the world is that? Well, you have these different foundations here, don't you? These foundations are from the Byzantine period, 324 to 640 AD. So something was going on in this building right here, long before 324 AD, that prompted the Byzantines to build a church around that building, on this building. Now, it's hard to see, but there is graffiti in there, in that circular structure right there that says that this was a church. And not only that this was a church, but that this was Peter's house. So it's first century-ish right here. And plus, it's the sanctity of site. There's something going on here. They're going to build a church on top of it. And it's quite probable then that was Peter's house. Kind of neat. Well, let's go to our next region, which is the Sharon Plain. The Sharon Plain. And as you can see from the map right here, the plain of Sharon, right, has the Mediterranean Sea to the west, the high hill country of Samaria to the to the east, Mount Carmel to the north, and then the plain of the Philistines, which we talked about previously then, to the south. You know, it's a site, guys, that's not mentioned a lot in the Bible. 1 Chronicles 27:29. You have to be careful how you say this word. Shithrai, the Sharonite, was in charge of the herds grazing in Sharon. So that when you think of the Sharon Plain, think of it as the par excellence for husbandry, for cattle, sheep, goat, that kind of area. Here's a bird's eye view of the region. Now, because it's a sandy kind of Kirkar kind of sandy region, it's the chariots aren't going to go through here, and so you could see from the main route, the Sharon Plain is right here. Highway 80. Right, does a sharp turn right before it gets to the Sharon Plain because it's just this really sandy area that the chariots of the cats, right, would get bogged down in. Now, one of the cities, or the only city we're going to zero in on here, is that of Caesarea. Now, it's a New Testament name of the city, and of course, you can hear the name Caesar, can't you, in Caesarea Maritime. And this was the Rome away from Rome in the land of Israel. It's physically, geographically, in the land of Israel, the closest you can get to Rome. It was the headquarters of Herod the Great. This is where he spent most of his time, okay, in Caesarea. And since Herod the Great is spending most of his time here, right, this city is going to be top shelf, par excellence. Here's an artist's rendition of what the city probably looked like and around Herod's time. You can see the beautiful port. The wharf that goes out there. By the way, Herod the Great invented underwater concrete. And he was able to make these long wharfs out there by inventing underwater concrete. Not only that, since you're on the sea and you're in the Sharon Plain where there's no water, what are you going to do for for water? Well, Herod the Great builds this beautiful aqueduct system that comes all the way from Mount Carmel, which is up here, down the coast to bring fresh water to the city. Pretty neat. There's the aqueduct right there. Besides the aqueduct, of course, you have the harbor or the port. You have the temple of Caesar Augustus right there, right? Caesar's God-man, just like Pharaoh is, right? And Herod has no problem with acknowledging him, at least, publicly, as God-man. You have the hippodrome right here, which we'll look at in a minute, an amphitheater, a palace. This would be the palace of Herod the Great. I mean, this is just top shelf kind of stuff. This is the hippodrome right here where they have, think of Ben-Hur, okay? The gladiator games, the chariot races, all these kind of things. This is an artist's reconstruction of what the theater looked like. Remember, we mentioned before a lot of the theater terms that Jesus uses, right? With the blowing of the shofar or the trumpet, and the word hypocrite, which means someone who wears a mask. And that's what the theater looks like today. They found something really neat in the steps of this theater. They found this stone, about that long, about that wide, and this stone was from the 1st century. And we talk about secondary usage stones, where instead of going out somewhere to get a stone, we'll just take a stone from here and we'll just stick it in the wall. And this stone is the only extra biblical mention of the name Pontius Pilate. Pilate's name is mentioned on that stone. And they were using it as a step, in the theater. It's just amazing. Well, Festus answered, Paul is being held at Caesarea, and I myself am going there soon. It was the largest prison also for the Roman soldiers at Caesarea. So, of course, at this time, Paul's at Jerusalem, and he goes from Jerusalem to Antipatris. When you read about Antipatris in the New Testament, the Old Testament name of the city is Aphek, A-P-H-E-K, and Aphek or Antipatris is like the launching pad on Highway 80 for the cats to go to the north or to the south from, a good staging area. And then from there, of course, they take them up to Caesarea. And what you're looking at here is the following. Of course, you have the hippodrome, and then this region right here was where the prison was. So that's where Paul would have been. This is 1st century-ish. And of course, because it's Herod the Great, you have right here a freshwater swimming pool. Well, let's go to our last region of the night, Samaria. Samaria, shamar, to guard. And it is indeed guarded very well. To the east by the Jordan Rift. To the west, the high mountains descending down to the plain. To the south, the high hill country of Judah. And to the north, the high hill country on its way to the Valley of Jezreel. You could see it right here. It's just nicely fortified, nicely tucked in area. By the way, when the Israelites first enter into the land at the time of Joshua, archaeology shows that the vast majority of them settled in Samaria, Ephraim and Samaria. Not only on Ephraim and Samaria, but on the eastern side of the ridge. Acts 1:8, we're familiar with that verse, right? But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, which we'll talk about next time, Lord willing, in all of Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. So Jerusalem, the fountainhead, that's where it starts. Then to Judea, the churches in Judea. Then it goes up to Samaria, and then the end of the earth. And then the launching pad for the end of the earth is Caesarea. That's where you go, right, to the end of the world. Well, let's look at Shechem. As you can see, Shechem is located right on Highway 5, right? The main north-south backbone of the country. And it would be the northern pole of what we would call the patriarchal highway, that main route that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would have walked on. And of course, the terminal then of that would be Beersheba in the south. Genesis 12:6, Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At Shechem. Now, here's a picture of Shechem. Right here you have Mount Aval, which means bald. And then you have Mount Gerizim right here. And Shechem, biblical Shechem, was down, here you go, down here in the valley. So what you're looking at there today is modern-day Nablus. Modern-day Nablus, which was biblical Shechem. You don't want to go in here. The only time to go in is if you're going with a group and with a tour and it's prearranged, and then you can go to the church that's supposedly built on top of Jacob's well. And you can drink the water. It's pretty good. Okay. But yeah, that's it. I was up here on Mount Gerizim many, many times, and I heard like 100 gunshots in 5 minutes. It was like, I thought it was in Compton or something. Okay? Right there. Now here's what the city probably looked like at the time of Abraham. Just this strong, well-fortified city right on the crosshairs of 5 and 44 or 5 and 20, something like that. The north-south, right, in the east-west route. Now, right up from there, of course, is Mount Gerizim, which we mentioned before. And to this very day, it's kind of neat. You can go to Mount Gerizim during the time of Passover and visit the Samaritan Passover. There's about 1,400 Samaritans left in the world. Half of them live on Mount Gerizim, and the other half live in a suburb of Tel Aviv. And once a year, every year, they gather together to do what the scriptures tell them to do, Passover. The Samaritans have a few tenets of the faith. Number one, the Samaritans believe in one God. Number one. Number two, they only believe in the book of Moses and Joshua. That's it. No Judges, no Ruth, no Samuel, nothing. They believe in the coming Messiah, whoever that might be. Well, we know who it is, but they don't obviously miss the boat. And they believe in the day of judgment. Number four, the final day of judgment. And they believe that Mount Gerizim, of course, is the mountain which you should go and worship upon. They believe God created Adam on Mount Gerizim, whereas most Jews believe God created Adam on Mount Zion. They believe Noah's Ark landed on Mount Gerizim. They believe Abraham offered up Isaac on Mount Gerizim and not Jerusalem. But you can go here and you can participate. I mean, you can get up close. You can sit on the basketball rim and watch the Passover. I mean, it's pretty cool. Now, why are they wearing white? That's a good question. John 4:35 says, "Do you not say there are yet 4 months, then comes the harvest? Look, I tell you, lift up your eyes and see that the fields are white for harvest." So what I'm thinking is going on here is that it's a double meaning. Not only was it April or May because it was harvest time and the crops were white, but also in antiquity, the Samaritans wore white. And so it's just this big flock of people coming down to meet Jesus after hearing the testimony of the woman at the well. And it's a double statement, right? Because they're all wearing white. Kind of neat. Well, just like the biblical Passover, they do the same thing. We have the advantage, don't we, of a padded pew, air-conditioned, sanitized, churchy kind of life. Or, of course, in the pages of the world, not that that's bad, but in the pages of the Bible, it's an earthy, dusty, sweaty, hot, persecuted, bloody religion. Very bloody. For the men's meeting on last Saturday night, I asked Pastor Lance if I could slit the throat of a sheep and we could cut it open and then eat it. And he said no. Absolutely not. He asked some guys. Just so we can kind of, sort of, look at a sheep and see that, how does it go in Isaiah 53? And no complaining came out of his mouth. Just to see an innocent sheep, right? Just have its neck slit and not do anything and not fight back and not kick back and just take it, right? And to see the blood poured out, right? And to see it shorn and to see it cut up and to see it does something to you. It's like, wow, this really is a bloody religion, right? We're saved by his blood, these kind of verses. But since we just get so sanitized and there's hand sanitizer everywhere and everything's clean, we don't like those kind of things. But this is it. This is as close as you could possibly ever get to being on the Temple Mount today. And you can do it. It's really cool. So on the count of 3, they just slit the throats and the blood drains down and they're eating with their clothes on and their staff in their hand and their sandals on their shoes and they're offering up the fat on the altar and, wow, pretty neat. Also in Shechem, in Joseph's bones. which the Israelites had brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem in the tract of the land that Jacob bought for 100 pieces of silver from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem. And according to tradition, that is the tomb of Joseph. Now, there's something in the world of the Bible called sanctity of sight. Sanctity of sight. That means in an orally transmitted dominant world where power is in the word and things are communicated not necessarily by writing but by word, and something happened here, this happened here, especially if it's some kind of religious figure, that transmission is going to stay. People are going to keep that narrative going. And so from generation to generation to generation, and new emperors, new cats, new come in, the Muslims have appropriated Joseph as a prophet. So they're not going to move the location of the tomb, even though this is an Ottoman period Muslim structure. So it's quite probable that that actually is the tomb of Joseph. And then Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar of the Lord, the God of Israel. Okay, so we should be able to go to Mount Ebal and maybe find the altar of Joshua. Maybe. And some people think they found it. That's it. Some people really believe that there's debate over it, you know. But that very well could probably be it. Well, let's go to one more site in our session tonight. We're going to go to the site of Shiloh. As you can see, Shiloh is right off of the Patriarchal Highway, Highway 5. Just it's a 2-day walk, or excuse me, about a day walk, 1 day walk from Shiloh right down there to Jerusalem. That site right here, Lavona, you know when it says that Mary and Joseph kind of realized that Jesus wasn't with the caravan after the temple when he was 12? They figured that out more than likely at Lavona, because Lavona would be the Holiday Inn that you would stay at as a traveler walking from Jerusalem to the north. It was just enough distance where it made a full day walk. And then they would get to Lavona, you know, Joseph would be talking with the men, Mary would be talking with the women. I thought you were watching him, I thought you were watching him, you know, he's gone. And but that's right across from Shiloh, okay? Now, that's Yahweh, abandoned the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent he had set up among the humans. And this is, of course, where the dwelling place of God was during the period of the Judges for hundreds and hundreds of years. There you go. Now, of course, you're not going to find the tabernacle because the tabernacle is made of cloth. It's going to deteriorate unless it's kept in the right conditions. In fact, in Jericho, in the regions of Jericho, because the temperature's right, the humidity's right, everything, archaeologists have found baskets in caves with fruit that's 4,000 years old. Someone told me that you could leave a McDonald's cheeseburger or a Hostess cupcake on the shelf and it'll never change, you know? But anyways, as soon as they breathed and touched the fruit, it just poof. But the fruit kept because it was so long. And so there's Jewish sources and legends that say that the tabernacle, they're not just going to throw it away, you know, that they rolled it up and kept it and put it in the belly of the Temple Mount, which we'll, Lord willing, talk about the Temple Mount next time. So there's Shiloh right here. Not a lot has really been done archaeologically in the site until recently because it's officially then become an Israeli Antiquity Authority site. So now money is being pumped into it. But there's one thing that they did find that I want to show you that is pretty cool. Now we know the tabernacle is 75 foot long by 150 foot wide because that's what the scriptures say, 75 by 150. What did archaeologists find? They found a leveled area of bedrock that was 75 by 150 foot long with a wine press and all those kind of things connected to it. Not only that, if you go in this area and you zoom in, they dug in the bedrock post holes to put up the sticks to hold up the tabernacle. And the post holes are located, just like the Bible says, at every so many feet. So that's pretty cool. It's just all the evidence kind of seems to point, right, that indeed that's where the tabernacle where God dwelt for 300 years. Questions? Comments? Concerns?